Greetings, and welcome to Ill Repute, the podcast about women and women first. I'm Sovereign Sire, a writer, a comedian, and petty.
Ma'am, I can attest, but with artistry,
Yes.
I'm Ella Darling, a virtual reality porn entrepreneur / pioneer. I don't know, I can do both. An erstwhile librarian, and a bitch who's frantically trying to figure out how to move across the country in less than 2 months.
And you're on the phone with me, and I was like, oh, that's easy stuff.
Sovereign's like,
easy
look,
stuff.
if you need me to reply to an email, I don't know what to tell you. Moving across the country, here's what you do, bitch. And you were right. I just needed a pep talk. You're good at those.
Like it's easy.
So,
I have a PhD in running away. So like,
oh
you
man,
need a new ID too? You need a new social security card.
no, of course I don't. Oink. We here on Ill Repute support women's rights.
But more importantly, we support women's wrongs.
And which woman's wrongs are we righting today, my dear Savi?
Elizabeth Wurtzel. So we're picking up where we left off last week. We described Elizabeth Wurtzel's early life. We followed her through college. We followed her through being a music critic that was much maligned. And we ended with her publishing her memoir, Prozac Nation, which became a cultural touchstone. And we kind of stopped there with the sentence, and let it be known, just because something is popular doesn't mean it's good.
Take that, Holly from 7th grade. She was like, cunt.
Yeah. So, from grandiose and claustrophobic, Prozac Nation turns 25 on longreads.com by Anne Thoreau, published September 25th, 2019. Quote, Prozac Nation is a young person's book, both in terms of its author and its target audience. What seemed most important to me about Wurtzel's writing was that she had been messy, and she was willing to detail that mess without apology. It was a radical departure from how I'd seen women write about themselves. Whether we like it or not, Prozac Nation really did change the landscape when it comes to the way women write about themselves. It laid the groundwork for what Jia Tolentino called the personal essay boom of the early 2010s, an era when no detail was too graphic, no humiliation too private for sharing, unquote.
I remember that being called life casting when people did it on social media, where it's just raw and delivered, like your naked yoga session, your private dirty laundry aired for the masses because it sparks conversation and you can kind of get a leg up in the argument if you write about it wittily 12 hours later to an audience of everyone.
Yeah, and she was very much like a predecessor to like the aesthetic social media account, where like the Caroline Callaways, the aesthetic pictures with like the really long captions, or vlogs, these kinds of things where people were treating their life like it was sort of a living art installation.
Yeah,
like I'm doing performance art.
I'm a museum piece, actually.
Exactly.
It's important to understand what was going on in the culture at this time. Prozac had just become popular, and record numbers of people were being diagnosed with depression. The chart-topping artists were Depeche Mode, Nirvana, and 9 Inch Nails. Bands that slap.
Yes.
Whose messages were those of apathy and wallowing in despair. And a few months before Prozac Nation was published, Kurt Cobain committed suicide. There was a problem, but people were also wary of how we were treating it. Anne Thoreau explains in the same Long Reads article,
quote, Wurtzel's semi-premise that the use of SSRIs was too widespread, that America had become a nation of pill poppers who were drawn to Prozac because of its name brand trendiness, seems especially unsturdy. For one thing, she doesn't even encounter the drug until the very end of the book, and when she does take it, she experiences a swift and nearly miraculous recovery. For another, all of the panic about SSRI consumption seems, in retrospect, almost adorable in its unfoundedness. Doctors were pushing the idea that OxyContin was non-habit forming in any amount, but people were worried about Prozac.
Damn. Many of those concerns piggybacked on the very real problems with mid-century tranquilizer use, but they were also influenced by what psychiatrist Gerald L. Klerman termed pharmacological Calvinism. The idea that a drug that alleviates unhappiness is morally questionable. It's an attitude that's still very much present today, even though the use of SSRIs has become more normalized over the past 25 years.
Pharmacological Calvinism is what makes your high school friend share those memes describing nature as the real antidepressant. It's what leads people to view medication that treats anxiety and depression as a crutch rather than an ongoing and necessary treatment, which is weird framing in and of itself, considering that people rarely use crutches unless they really need them. Unquote.
I have never heard that assertion made about the term crutch. And that's really sincere and poignant to me.
Yeah. This is probably a little too distant of a read from Anne. However, I just read Prozac Nation, and in the epilogue, Wurtzel's assertions are a little more guarded. She believes that while chemical imbalances are real, that they are likely caused by long periods of depression that go untreated, and that the sources of those depressions for most people are things outside of their control: racism, sexism, the economy, in general, a loss of hope that things will get better.
Another thing was happening in the culture. The Spice Girls, Gwen Stefani and No Doubt, Courtney Love, Riot Girls, in essence, a new kind of feminism. Hole and Courtney Love extolled a kinder horror aesthetic that literally captured the motif of not so much arrested development, but a refusal to buy into adulthood. Wurtzel was swept into the same feminism, the Madonna feminism that said being a slut was empowering, that reduced feminism to a brand. It made her controversial. She was being shot in a t-shirt that read hips, lips, tits, showing her stomach, with long, girly blonde hair and writing about blowjobs. To younger women, she offered a more appealing feminism. And to dyed-in-the-wool feminists, she represented everything wrong with the girls coming up behind them. The sentiment seemed to be, I didn't break the glass ceiling to let in this. The most egregious thing seemed to be that she was young, hot, and talented, and she knew it.
So let's take a break here in the script. Do you remember the fervor around antidepressants and like Ritalin when that kind of started being a thing? I was pretty young, so you may have been too young.
I was pretty young. I remember antidepressants because they were an incredible, swift, great thing in my household because I come from neuroatypical. And I remember discussions around Ritalin mostly being about like just kind of shaming kids for being on it as though the children are the ones who asked to. Like like we've got drug-seeking 7-year-olds or something. That's what I remember of that time.
I remember two things. I was pretty young, but there was we used to have a phrase going postal.
Yeah, which is very insensitive.
So a post office worker returned to his job and killed everybody. And it came out that he was on Prozac. And it was like, there had been this like ramping up of fear. So like a lot of the discourse was like, even if it works, like a happy pill, like, is that moral? Is that ethical? Is that good for us? Like, shouldn't we be addressing these underlying problems? Everyone's on it. We don't know enough about what it's going to do to you. And then, oh, look, this guy came back and like after he was like fired or terminated or laid off, came back and killed everybody. See, we told you there was going to be some unanticipated effects. And then also Ritalin and the diagnosis of ADHD was relatively new. And all the jokes were that, like, just tell them to sit down and shut the fuck up and pay attention.
It's very much the bootstrap boomer generation.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing with antidepressants. Like, even recognizing that depression's like a real thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, everybody feels sad sometimes. Just have you tried working out about it? You should just go outside.
Yeah. And that's the thing about mental illness as well as immunocompromised individuals is that their disability is invisible. And we live in a culture that's like still can't reconcile that someone can look outwardly functional and healthy and be dealing with something debilitating at the same time. So that's the discourse that the book was birthed into, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the book is published and it does great despite the sneering of her peers. And I can't emphasize enough how much people hated her for existing. But money talks, which meant that she got a sizable advance for her next book, $500,000, which in the late 90s was still a huge amount of money.
Oh, that's the most depressing thing I've heard on this podcast, and we've had some doozies.
Yeah. Her next book was Bitch, in praise of difficult women. It was a collection of essays that did not sell well at all. The reviews were pretty harsh. It featured her topless on the cover, flipping off the camera. People didn't like that. Soon that cover was axed for a more palatable one. It received the same complaints that Prozac Nation had: disjointed, contradictory, narcissistic, a mess, much like Lizzie herself.
I am going to pull up, I'm just going to do a quick little Google because I would love to see this cover. Because I remember this book.
The criticism of her was her analysis is shallow, it's reductive, it's messy, and the only reason she's selling books is because she's young and hot.
She was an anathema at the time.
Yeah. She was polarizing. Young women were just like, yeah, she's great. You other people that are criticizing you're just jealous because you're like old and whatever. You know how girls in their 20s are. They think we're jealous.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It's like, baby, I'm not scared of you. I'm scared for you.
Could not. There's no amount of money that you could pay me to be 22 again.
No.
She followed up with another memoir called More Now Again. The following is from Wikipedia. Quote, More Now Again, 2001, was the follow-up memoir to Prozac Nation and centered primarily on her addictions to cocaine and Ritalin. The book discusses her drug-induced obsession with tweezing as a form of self-harm and recounts her behavior while writing Bitch, among other subjects. It received generally negative reviews. For Ceylon, Peter Kurth wrote that Wurtzel, quote, imagines that every word she utters and every thought that pops into her head is fraught with meaning and portent. And still, her new book goes nowhere. He called the book dysfunctional, characterized the author as an overage adolescent, and concluded, sorry, Elizabeth, wake up dead next time and you might have a book on your hands.
Ooh.
They were mean to her. I don't need to
awful.
stand in defense of any of the things that were like forthright obnoxious about her, but that's wake up dead next time to a depressed person? Are you kidding me? She might, homie. How are you going to feel?
Right.
And this is like, online.
Because I know that we have a younger audience. If there's that lady in your office and she just seems like an asshole and she's like in her late 30s, she's in her 40s, maybe she's in her early 50s. Like when she came up, this was so acceptable. It was so acceptable to do this to women. Mm-hmm. It was like the 90s and early 2000s, like ironically, were all about this sort of proto, like anarchic feminism, but it was like heroin chic. Mm-hmm. It was like the sexism, the strip club is great, like female CEOs being dragged into strip clubs to be like one of the guys. Sexual harassment was a joke. It was hard.
We didn't have the phrase internalized misogyny yet.
No.
To know what was going on.
So that Gen X lady in your office that you think is just understand that she was essentially dropped in Vietnam of like gender dynamics. There's a kind of, and this is all down to patriarchy, is this idea that youth is an achievement.
Right.
Especially among women. Youth in and of itself is an achievement. I'm here to tell you guys it's not. If you're a 20-something and you think you've got it all figured out and you think you're going to change everything in 10 years, you're going to look back and you're going to cringe so hard because you're going to come to realize what that Gen X woman already knows, which is, yes, on paper, it sounds easy, but institutionally, a system has been built up with a bunch of Easter eggs and hidden features that you're also going to have to navigate. So yes, on paper, it all seems so simple. And for a lot of people, until they actually go through the experience of being undermined, being sidelined, all the things through unofficial channels, in unofficial gray ways, ambient, until you've had the experience of being sidelined through completely arcane circumstances. The answer seems very simple on the outside, but then when you get into the institution and you recognize how much discrete software is there to keep you at a certain level, like once you go through that and you understand it, then then it makes sense why, if the solution is so easy, why is no one doing it? Wikipedia goes on. In The Guardian, Toby Young wrote that Wurtzel's overweening self-regard oozes from every sentence, and concluded, in a sense, more now again is the reductio ad absurdum of this whole self-obsessed genre. It's a confessional memoir by someone who has nothing to confess. Wurtzel has nothing to declare apart from her self-adoration. A better title for it would be Me, Myself, I.
It continues. What a messy load it is, wrote Pace University professor Judith Schlesinger in the Baltimore Sun. Schlesinger wrote that Wurtzel focused on, quote, her contempt for other people, including her readers, who were expected to wade through her sloppy story, buy her shallow rationalizations, and tolerate her incessant tone of self-congratulation and entitlement, unquote.
So, yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
In essence, it seemed that Lizzie had worn out her welcome. People could sympathize with a depressed kid coming of age, but that 20-something became a rich and famous author. And still, being a mess was a step too far. The death of Kurt Cobain and other celebrities from overdoses and suicides had cooled the alternative rock scene. Indie labels had been snatched up by corporate ones. And balance had righted itself. People were tired of being depressed. This was the time for Britney Spears, for sparkly pop. The economy was doing better. The dot-com bubble had crashed, and now the economy had righted itself. Deciding the excesses of the slacker generation had done enough damage, and now it was time to get back to work.
In 2001, a film adaptation of Prozac Nation was released. It starred Christina Ricci and was produced by Miramax. Ooh, Miramax. Weinstein. The film had a budget of $9 million and grossed $130,000. It was the nail in the coffin for Wurtzel, so to speak. Her time to shine was gone, squandered by her own character flaws, much as she had predicted when she was an 11-year-old girl trying to overdose on allergy pills at summer camp.
In 2004, Wurtzel applied to Yale Law School. Despite tepid LSAT scores, she was accepted because of her fame. She received her Juris Doctorate in 2008, but failed the bar exam the first time, though she did eventually pass and went on to work at Boies, Schiller, and Flexner from 2008 to 2012.
Who is that?
It's a law firm. Just a law firm in Manhattan.
Okay.
She eventually left the firm, citing her desire to spend more of her time writing. What followed were a series of viral articles that went viral for all the wrong reasons. You can fault Lizzie for a lot, but not for commitment to the bit.
In 2009, she published an article in Elle magazine titled Failure to Launch When Beauty Fades. An excerpt. So here's what I'm getting at. I was, at least at some baseline, a pretty girl, the kind that boys were supposed to like and sometimes did. And because I was cute all along, it's not like I blossomed into honeysuckle after adolescence, I was given to believe that love would be easy, men would be elementary, and I would have my way. Love would be simpler than tying a string bikini, the kind I wore a lot while waiting on the beach for my ship to come in.
She goes on. Age is a terrible avenger. The lessons of life give you so much to work with, but by the time you've got all this great wisdom, you don't get to be young anymore. And in this world, that's just about the worst thing that can happen, especially to a woman. Whoever said youth is wasted on the young actually got it wrong. It's more that maturity is wasted on the old, unquote.
I held back from saying youth is wasted on the young literally 5 minutes ago because I didn't want to be that asshole. But I at least think that's an interesting response to that quote.
But you see, it's like this is the problem with Elizabeth Wurtzel's writing, right? Is that
how old was she at this time? What year is this? This is 2000.
She's like in her 40s, late 40s, or early 40s. These are like cliches.
Yeah, she's not saying anything new.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's just she's the one saying it, and that's what makes it apparently noteworthy. In September of 2012, Penguin sued her. They had given her a $100,000 advance for a book that she failed to publish. It was meant to be a book to help teenagers deal with depression. They sued her for the $30,000 they had advanced her and another $7,000 in interest. The case was dismissed with prejudice. In 2013, she published an article about her state of affairs that drew a great deal of criticism. We've included an abridged version here.
Quote, "It had all gone wrong. At long last, I had found myself vulnerable to the worst of New York City, because at 44, my life was not so different from the way it was at 24. Stubbornly and proudly, emphatically and pathetically, I had refused to grow up. And so I was becoming one of those people who refuses to grow up, one of the city's lost boys. I was still subletting in Greenwich Village instead of owning in Brooklyn Heights. I had loved everything about Yale Law School, especially the part where I graduated at 40, but I spent my life savings on an abiding interest, which is a lot to invest in curiosity."
She continues, "I was amazed to discover that, according to The Atlantic, women still can't have it all. Bah humbug. Women who have it all should try having nothing. I have no husband, no children, no real estate, no stocks, no bonds, no investments, no 401k, no CDs, no IRAs, no emergency fund. I don't even have a savings account. It's not that I've not planned for the future. I've not planned for the present. I do have a royalty account, some decent skills, and apparently a lot of human capital. But because of choices I've made, wisely and idiotically, because I had principles or because I was crazy, I have no assets and no family."
She goes on, "Please understand, I live specifically with intent. The intent is, I know now, not at all specific, except that I have no ability to compromise. I likely do the right things for the wrong reasons. But it has also meant that I have not disciplined myself into the kinds of commitments that make life beyond the wild of youth into a haven of calm. I am proud that I have never so much as kissed a man for any reason besides absolute desire, and I am more pleased that I only write what I feel like, and it has been lucrative since I got out of college in 1989. I had the great and unexpected success of Prozac Nation in 1994, and that brought me freedom. And I have spent that freedom carelessly and with great gratitude. Why would I do anything else? I did not expect, not ever, to be scared to death."
She goes on, "For a while after my first book came out, I went home with a different man every night and did heroin every day, which showed my good sense, because the rest of the time I was completely out of control. My parents were divorced, my mother had many part-time jobs over the years to support us, and I grew up in HUD housing, first in the West 90s, then not far from Lincoln Center. I went to private school on scholarship and worked extremely hard because I wanted to grow up and not live near rodent-infested playgrounds where we clung to the handlebars crossing the horizontal ladders to keep our toes from touching rats." That seems like an invention of her own mind and an experience she almost certainly never had. I do not think she was balance beaming over a pit of rats at her local playground.
Yeah.
But okay, go off.
She goes on, "I don't know what made me believe that writing was going to solve my problems, since all anyone ever told me was that no one made money that way. But I knew that no one did not include me. I was intensely downcast with a chronic depression that began when I was about 10, but instead of killing my will, it motivated me. I thought if I could be good enough at whatever task, great or small, that was before me, I might have a few minutes of happiness. I would do trigonometry problem sets as if plotting a sine curve could save me.
If great talent did not require infrastructure to nurture it, Norman Mailer and Martin Scorsese would as likely exist in Papua New Guinea or, for that matter, Norway. But the arts have thrived, and great work has supported itself without the benefit of government subsidy, because this country was founded with an intellectual property system and a free press that understood that creativity and capitalism are happy partners. All of that has broken down between piracy and technology, and I do not expect that a satisfactory model will be invented that allows these choices to work. Forget serious journalism. Publicly funded universities are the next frontier of unnatural disaster.
She goes on. Until I went away to law school, I made a very good living as a writer and never had to do anything else. But I never saved or invested because I believe if you take care of the luxuries, the necessities will take care of themselves. When I got a huge advance for Bitch, my second book, I bought a Birkin bag, which Maria has since stolen. If I had spent the money on a mutual fund from T. Rowe Price, I might well have panicked and lost it during the financial crisis of 2008, and I would never have had the pleasure of schlepping my stuff on the IRT in Hermes.
What's the IRT?
It's like the railroad.
Got it. She continues, maybe I should have been wiser, but the only way I could have was to have been a completely different person. Along the way, probably becoming a different writer, most likely a lousy one. I'm fortunate to have been well paid for an almost pathological honesty, and the only way I'm able to write that way is by being that way. I established myself as someone much too precious. And honest, I don't pretend to like people I don't, and I can't pretend to respect people who don't deserve it.
She goes on. I'm like everybody else. I think about spending the rest of my life with every person I fall in love with, and I cry longer and harder and more than I should when it all goes wrong. I've spent an amazing amount of my life in tears. I've thought my heart was broke and done, but there was always the next one and the next one. Or I went to law school. Or I did something else. Am I just not serious? Okay, there you have it. All the things that other people are willing to do that make them adjustable like appliances, I can't.
She continues, I can only love with a pure heart and hope for the best. Still, this story has the best possible ending because I am telling it. I've always made choices without considering the consequences because I know all I get is now. Maybe I get later too, but I'll deal with that later. I choose pleasure over what is practical. I feel very caught.
People didn't respond kindly to this. I mean, she got torn apart, for all of it. Just,
yeah,
as just be like, boo-hoo. Like, I was a huge celebrity and best-selling author, and people were just like, read the room.
Yeah,
right.
See, I feel a lot of things she's saying, because I'm not a real grown-up, I'm like, I relate to that. But also, I'm not proud of those things. I'm declaring them to you, my bestie Sovereign, and our audience, who are our only nearest and dearest closest friends, I'm sure. But to put this out as though, like, everything she publishes, especially at this time, is in some way or another taking up resourced space, whether that's print inches on an actual newspaper or just whatever headlines were available to be distributed at the time and paid for at the time. So she's earning money that other journalists are struggling to earn by writing navel-gazing that she needs to realize that other people can read.
Yeah.
Like, we can see what you're saying. Like, we can all read this. Do you realize this isn't private?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in 2013, she met James Freed Jr. They became engaged in 2014, and in 2015, they married. In that same year, Wurtzel found out that she had breast cancer. They married while she was in treatment. In 2016, she found out that her biological father was actually Bob Edelman, a civil rights photographer her mother had worked with. It was through him that she had inherited the breast cancer gene. She had a double mastectomy and reconstruction.
She died on January 7th, 2020, at the age of 52 from complications from breast cancer. 2 years later, in 2022, her personal effects were quietly sold through an online auction. Despite being a lawyer, she hadn't left a will.
So this has been like reading heavy, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
So this is from an essay called The Last Traces of Elizabeth Wurtzel by Cora Cija. Quote, Elizabeth Wurtzel died nearly 3 years ago. Since then, silence. No announcement of a repository of her papers, no posthumous publications, no conferences for the countless writers indebted to her. And so her friends, the women who helped her prepare on the morning of her mid-chemo wedding in 2015, the women who took her spectacular text messages and cropped them into essays, were shocked to find out, only after the fact, that the writer's personal belongings were sold off in an online auction last week.
These estate sale auctions, hugely popular during the pandemic, are usually straightforward. Used and useful objects sold off at a competitive price. This one felt different. Many of the objects were without worth apart from the aura of their owner. Many were worth more than a price tag could suggest. That the auction was a surprise to those who knew her best was bad, and the tackiness of a storage space online auction was rotten. Wurtzel would have laughed, but also been horrified. Friends of hers likely thought. The bargain basement prices that resulted made it feel all the more cruel. Is that okay?
Yeah. It goes on. There was the handbag that they knew Wurtzel would have wanted to go to a specific friend. And even with a reserve of $6,500, the Birkin did not find a purchaser. There went the entire contents of her desk, including 3 heaping cups of pens and pencils, sold off for $29. The desk itself, beautifully marked with use, had a bit of a bidding war and went for just $535, still way under estimate. A drawing of her rescue dog, Augusta, sold for $20. I bought her coffee table for $100. Quote, needs refinishing, the listing claimed incorrectly, precisely because the signs of hard use on it.
Wow. Oh, God, that's depressing.
Yeah.
Wurtzel had a romantic attachment to luxury that's common among people who grew up without money and who thrive within a constant roar of financial chaos, she goes on. A music writer for this magazine, she became one of the most famous Gen X writers with her first book. Her second netted her a $500,000 advance.
The piece goes on. Wurtzel's permanent record is littered with tax liens, a bankruptcy filing, even an eviction in New Haven while she was in law school in the mid-2000s. As her apartments were littered with Hermes scarves and Chloe sunglasses, the Wurtzel aesthetic was consistent across the auction lots, from the hippie-ish engraved silver bracelet, $19, to the heap of half-used perfumes, Tom Ford's Cafe Rose, Suave, Estee Lauder's Youth Dew, $130. She was one of those women who used scent as another means to aggressively assert her presence. It was part of what could make you unable to decide, as the hour got late, if you were her honored guest or her hostage.
Cancer has never made anyone's financial life less chaotic. Despite years of illness, it seems as if no one, including herself, expected it when, at the beginning of 2020, Wurtzel died at 52. She was somewhere in the process of divorce. According to friends, when she died, she had signed divorce papers, but they were not filed. But also, her husband was close to her until the end. Similarly, she had significant conflict with her mother, Lynn Winters, having found out that her father was not actually her father just a few years prior, but her mother was also near. There was apparently, again, no will. Neither Wurtzel's husband nor mother responded to inquiries. That Wurtzel held a law degree and yet made a flagrant mess of her own estate seems perfect. She put on all of the best disasters. All my homies love Wurtzel's disasters, like hot as shit, so hard.
In ones and threes, her objects were taken from an extremely tidy LaGuardia-adjacent storage building. Off went the leather belts and scarves and first editions and Andy Warhol lip gloss, plus an entire lot of early-on chips from at least 3 12-step programs. They say you can't buy sobriety, but you could buy these chips for $85. It was sad. Everyone agreed. That's what friends said. That's what the woman coming to pick up a Bruce Springsteen book with Wurtzel scrawled notes in it said, too.
The unsold items and the mysterious remaining contents of a storage locker that were not put up for auction, would be returned to the custody of Wurtzel's mother. Last week, the fine print said that a dealer was trying to place Wurtzel's manuscripts with a university library. One of the most important writers of her generation has been dead for nearly 3 years, and no institution has made a home for her papers. Criminal, she concludes.
So we'll end with a quote from an interview Wurtzel did with another Gen X icon, Liz Phair, for Interview magazine. She says, quote, "I've often felt like I don't need anybody else to be on my side because I'm on my side. I do think that's unusual in people, but I think it's especially unusual in women," unquote.
Damn.
Yeah, we did it.
We did it. I'm going to say so much of this I feel defensive of, I relate to, I feel some sense of like understanding for, not because I relate to her position as a writer or a Gen X writer, icon, polarizing figure, but because I recognize the impact her writing has had on writing in general over the following years. And a lot of the stuff she's writing about, it doesn't feel foreign to me. It doesn't feel anodyne? Does it feel a little tropey and derivative? Sure. Is it secondhand embarrassing? Most certainly. But that's kind of the writing that I've come up on, not in my youth necessarily, but in the like adult youth years after leaving a marriage where I basically like had to relearn adulthood and all stuff like that. It just, I don't know. I find her
compelling. She's compelling.
Compelling as hell. Absolutely. And
well,
man.
I mean, I think people felt like she kind of personified like the worst excesses of femininity, just like vanity, self-obsession, superficial concerns. I love my Hermes and my Birkin bag, and it's my whole life revolves around my romantic partner, and I'm just, the thing that makes me the saddest is that I've gotten older and I'm not as like, you know, like in a certain way. It's like she is like, oh, this is like the worst of femininity, right? Like this is at it like its extremes. But at the same time, you know, our experiences are valid.
Yeah.
You know,
like that's the thing. Like, I feel like she's writing about authentic female experiences that hadn't been written about, that haven't been spoken, that haven't been voiced. And when I read her, like, not her writing, but her style of writing that has been, you know, pretty proliferate, I read myself in things that I never read myself in. And I'm not great. I'm not perfect. I'm not admirable. I'm an anti-hero at best, and that's self-aggrandizing in and of itself. And her makes me feel like, yeah, that is not too far from me.
That's Elizabeth Wurtzel. Like that is the saga of Elizabeth Wurtzel. You know, like the party girl, the bad girl, you know, the hot mess. She was emblematic. She wrote a book that is seminal. I mean, it represented a generation, and
she's an icon of her generation. And I
really wish she would have lived long enough for me to meet her. I feel like she would have liked me.
She would have loved you, and actually, you would have loved her too.
I think
you would absolutely check your mind on her. I bet, because you like me well enough. It seems.
Yeah,
I love
you.
I don't actually relate that deeply and corely to her. It's just her writing really defined the writing that went on to define my generation.
Yes, yeah,
it was a potent seed that was planted that was eventually sown decades later, and that's why I feel this sort of like all shucksiness towards her.
I feel like Vice was her legacy.
Yeah,
like Vice magazine was her legacy essentially. Like those kind of like, I'm going into the thing and I'm gonna be really blunt about like my stuff because I'm cool, you know, like there's a kind of like she predated Tumblr to a degree, but I mean that's where all that came from, that extremely confessional, I'm gonna talk very candidly about my mental illness, I'm gonna talk very candidly about my trauma, like that all came from her. You gotta respect the game. She played it. She had a really good run and then was tragically taken far too soon.
Indeed. Savi, this has been fantastic, and I love your research and your work on this.
Thank you.
Will you credit us out?
Yes. The script was written by me, Sovereign Sire. It's been hosted by Sovereign Sire and Miss Ella Darling. Produced by Josh Anderson. Sources will be linked in the show notes. And if you would like to support the podcast, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/illrepute. It is functionally a tip jar at the moment. We have one tier, it's $5. It is free to join. And then you will be kept abreast of all the happenings at Ill Repute. But if you would like to throw us a tip, you can join at that tier. Buy us a coffee.
Be so kind to you. Sovereign, thank you for this incredible script. I love you so much. And see.
We did it.
We did it. I'm going to stop recording.
Yeah, me too.